Hello. Nice to see you all here. Adjust things just a little bit. Start with the verse of the Kesa. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Tathagata's teaching, freeing all creations. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Tathagata's teaching, freeing all creations. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Tathagata's teaching, freeing all creations. For Kata of Atonement. All evil karma ever committed by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thought, now I atone for it all. All evil karma ever committed by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thought, now I atone for it all. All evil karma ever committed by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thought, now I atone for it all. Fragrance of this incense invites the awakened mind to be present with us now. The fragrance of this incense fills our room, protects and guards our minds from wrong thinking. The fragrance of this incense unites us with precepts, concentration, and insight. We offer it for all beings. Homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. I go to the Buddha for guidance. I shall become one with the Buddha. I resolve that I shall each day follow the way of life he laid down for us to walk and awaken to his supreme wisdom. I go to the Dharma for guidance. I shall become one with the Dharma. The gates of Dharma are manifold. I vow to enter them all. The goal of wisdom is ever beyond. I shall attain it. I go to the Sangha for guidance. I shall become one with the Sangha. In the spirit of universal fellowship, and as a member of the Sangha, I pledge myself to strive for the enlightenment of all beings. Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upward to the skies and downward to the depths, outward and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, sitting or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into the world of suffering. May I be happy and well, may no harm come to me, may I learn compassion. May all my friends, family, and those I love be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all those troubled in body, mind, and spirit be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all those who have hurt me in body, mind, and spirit be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all those I have hurt in body, mind, and spirit be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all my enemies be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all living beings be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. So we'll do an equanimity meditation tonight. A few nice deep breaths. Focusing on letting your belly be soft so your lungs can fill and empty naturally and completely. And let the breath settle. And just focusing on the out breath with your attention at the center of your chest. Allowing this phrase just to arise in your heart as you breathe out. May I be happy. May I be free from animosity. May I be free from stress and affliction. May I look after myself with ease. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free from animosity. May all beings be free from stress and affliction. May all beings look after themselves with ease. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings enjoy and appreciate the blessings they have received. So if you're doing the Monday night program, just pick your neutral person, your acquaintance. And if this is all new to you, just think of someone who's an acquaintance, not someone you love, not someone that you're having difficulty with, just someone that you know, but perhaps don't know too well. But you know that, like yourself and your friends and loved ones, that they want happiness and they experience happiness and they do better when they're happy, when they're free from animosity and stress. And that many of the things that they do because they're looking for that. And you know that, like yourself and your loved ones and your friends, that they experience the suffering that comes with birth, death, illness, old age, separation from the beloved, association with people and circumstances they don't love. All those forms of suffering that are inherent to human existence. And you know that, like yourself and your friends and loved ones, that they experience good fortune. You may not know much about that, but if you know them, then they're living in a civilized country, and that's the result of past good actions. And they probably have access to food and water, clean air. They live in a world with people like you in it, and that's good fortune. All things, all compounded things, come and go because of karma, because of actions. All beings are the owners of their karma. In other words, that's the things that that's the one thing that's really ours, our actions. All beings are heirs to their karma. We're all born of karma. I'm a human being because of things that happened before I was born. You can see that as previous existence, but also things like ancestry, coming into being in a certain culture, having certain genetic makeup and certain cultural predispositions. All those things are there because of actions. And all beings are related by karma. So this acquaintance of yours is connected to you by action. Things that happen to them are partly a result of their karma and partly a result of their relations. All beings live supported by their karma. Whatever they do, good or evil, they will inherit the results. So just take a moment, think about your acquaintance, and recognize that whatever they experience is the result of their own karma. And you too are the result of your past actions. I am the owner of my karma, the heir to my karma. Born of karma, related to all beings by karma. Whatever karma I do, whatever actions I do, good or evil, skillful or unskillful, harmful or harmless, however you want to look at that, I will inherit the results. And consider this with your loved one and your friend. They are the owners of their karma. Heirs to their karma. Born of karma and related by karma. They live supported by their karma. And whatever they do, good or evil, they will inherit the results. And the same with your adversary. They are what they are because of their karma. They can't be anything different than what karma has made them. And no one else can experience the results of their actions. They're the owners of their karma, heirs to their karma, born of their karma. Supported by it, related by it. Whatever they do, good or evil, they'll experience the results. All beings are the owners of their karma. Heirs to their karma. Born of karma, related by karma. All beings live supported by their karma. Whatever they do, good or evil, they inherit the results. So just sit for a moment, aware of the rise and fall of existence within you, all around you. That it all happens because of causes and conditions. That within all of that change, we can be balanced and at peace. Accepting what is. And gradually just let your attention come to settle on your breath. Buddha nature pervades the whole universe, existing right here now, and offering flowers, candles, and incense, hearing the Dharma, training the mind, great merit is attained. We dedicate this merit to the great Master Sakyamuni Buddha, honored one, the all-pervading and everlasting three treasures, to the 16 guardians and all protectors of the Dharma and their relations throughout space and time, to all ancestors of the Sangha, all beings in the Dharma world. May penetrating light dispel the darkness of ignorance. Let all karma be resolved in the mind flower bloom in eternal spring. May the Dharma body maintain strength and health, and years of life be lengthened for all teachers of this Sangha. May their vows be fully realized. May they live in perfect peace with Buddha Dharma. We pray for those suffering from violence and those who grieve for them, for those living in oppression, for all who are imprisoned who should be free, for all refugees from violence, hunger, and catastrophe, man-made or natural. We pray for the health and well-being of those suffering from diseases of body, mind, or spirit, those working toward the healing of those afflictions. We pray for those suffering from COVID-19, those protecting and treating them, and those grieving for those lost to this pandemic. May they be serene through all their troubles, and may we realize the enlightened way together. Sabe sata sadahantu avera sukha jivino Katang punya phalang maham sabe bhagi bhavantu te. May all beings always live happily, free from animosity. May all share in the blessings arising from the good we have done. Happy holidays to you as well, Kathleen. It's good to see everybody here. So just before I launch into a Dharma talk, just reminders that I plan to be there tomorrow on Zoom. Sunday is going to probably be a little different. So I'm going to be at White Sands. But because my tech support won't be there with me, I think I'm probably not going to live stream the service. I think I'll probably just put up a Dharma talk sometime between now and Sunday morning. So if you've been watching services from home, you can watch last week's service and then this week's Dharma talk or something like that. Because it's just, there's probably people there that I could recruit, but I don't know for sure, especially since it's the day after, since it's a couple of days after Christmas and all that kind of stuff. I just don't know who's going to be there. So I'm just not going to try. But I'll have something here for you to look at. So in fact, what I'm going to have is kind of a follow-up to what I'm going to talk about tonight. This subject has come up a couple of times in Q&As and on the Monday and or Thursday, kind of touched on some of these things. And I thought, well, I should go back to some notes that I have about talks that I've given on this subject before and revisit this. And it's a good subject. So science and Buddhism. So I came to Buddhism as a teenager and largely out of an interest in meditation. I was interested in religion generally, and Buddhism appealed to me mainly because of the meditation aspect of it. But aside from that, one of the things about Buddhism that appealed to me was its approach to morality, for lack of a better term, ethics. So in my previous experience with religion, some deity said that I must not do certain things. Thou shalt not do certain things. And if I did them, I was sure to experience an eternity of torment as a result of that. Buddhism, on the other hand, gave me an opportunity to set my mind on refraining from harmful things and doing helpful things. And as a result of this, I would receive greater spiritual freedom and more happiness, and perhaps even be reborn in a heaven or transcend existence in favor of something even better. So the two religions that I had experience with, the one that I grew up with, and Buddhism, which was appealing to me, is presented essentially the same stuff, very similar sets of moral guidelines, but in very different ways. And so I found it fascinating to see that the religion I grew up with actually left me feeling kind of alienated by its moralism, while Buddhist ethics and morality inspired this sense of possibility. And so it turns out that there are some scientific reasons for this, for the different reaction that I had. So listen, I'm going to talk about Buddhism and science, and in the process, I'll talk about some of the benefits of practice in this sort of secular realm. But I want to make a couple of things clear first. First, Buddhism is not a self-help program. It's not another pop psychotherapy. Yes, there are psychological benefits and physical benefits too from doing Buddhist practice, but Buddhism goes beyond that. It's not just something you do to make yourself feel good or to make yourself healthier even. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but Buddhism isn't just that. There's this argument, is Buddhism a religion? And it is a religion, at least in part because Buddhism has something that psychology and pop self-help movements and philosophies and things like that don't have, which is what religious studies professors refer to as soteriology, a doctrine of salvation. And I'll go more into that Sunday. But and second, I don't think that this is limited to Buddhism. I think other religions have probably functioned in similar ways. But some religions, or at least the followers of some other religions, have managed to kind of bury these benefits and realizations beneath layers of dogma that I think are kind of destructive. But, that's certainly not all other religions and not all practitioners of other religions. It's just that I think what we see a lot of the time never really gets to that point. Anyway, when you think about interaction between science and religion, this is kind of a good example of this. So what comes to mind? And mostly we think about the clashes, the Scopes trial, for instance, which is when those of you who haven't read about it or haven't seen Inherent the Wind, a teacher was back in the early part of the last century was accused of the crime of teaching evolution in school and was prosecuted for it. And then before that, there was Galileo's run-in with Inquisition over whether or not the Earth was the center of the universe. He was prosecuted for teaching that it wasn't the center of everything. But in the last couple of decades, there's been a lot of research, some of it sparked by growing interest in meditation. And we've seen the emergence of things like mindfulness-based emotional intelligence as a program, as a concept. And so a few years ago, as part of what got me thinking about this, was I completed a facilitator training in an MBEI, mindfulness-based emotional intelligence program for at-risk juveniles and incarcerated individuals, called the Path of Freedom. And then not long after that, I happened to take a MBEI program online that was really geared toward leadership development coaching and career coaching and things like that. And it was taught by a guy named Richard Boyatzis, who is a professional of organizational behavior, psychology, and cognitive science at Case Western Reserve University, and is kind of a big name in this subject and has worked with people who are probably even bigger names in that same field. And in the same year or so, I took an online course in Buddhism and modern psychology with a guy named Robert Wright, who's written a book since then This course was actually part of this research process for doing this book, which I think is called "Is Buddhism True?" or something like that, or "Buddhism is True." You can look it up. It was Robert Wright. Anyway, and so I took this online course with him, and he's a psychologist and lecturer at Princeton University's religion department. And then if a question came up Monday night that really referred directly to him, or my answer referred directly to him, I mentioned something that he had said, which is why one of the reasons why I wanted to come back and talk about this now. So we have discovered that a lot of science is surprisingly aligned with ideas that the Buddha talked about 2,500 years ago. And among other things, relatively new technology like functional magnetic resonance imaging has made it possible for neuroscientists and psychologists to better understand the mental phenomena that make up the human experience. And so, for example, you can kind of explain now scientifically my different reactions to Buddhist morality versus Baptist morality, and how they probably came out of different reactions in my nervous system. Now, I'm not an expert on this at all. I'm just going to tell you a few things that I've kind of picked up along the way, because I'm a little fascinated with this, this idea of science and religion being supporting one another. So the fear of hell probably figures the sympathetic nervous system. It's not the way it sounds. Sympathetic nervous system is actually kind of a bad thing, or an unpleasant thing. It's not bad. It's the one that creates the fight or flight response. So in his mindfulness-based emotional intelligence leadership program, Boyatzis called that type of mechanism a negative emotional attractor, meaning it triggers an aversion. So it's really not an emotional. It's a negative attractor, as in it's not an attractor at all. It does the opposite. So it is to attract. We think in Buddhism, we think of attraction and aversion, right? And so this triggers an aversion in the nervous system. The possibility of awakening would be a positive emotional attractor. It triggers or causes to light up or activate or whatever, however neurologists would put that. So the parasympathetic nervous system, which makes me feel good. And so I'm drawn toward that because of it, and more likely to be motivated toward action. So the negative emotional attractor is important. It helps the human organism to survive. This is the whole negative reinforcement idea. If you do something and you get an electrical shock, you don't want to do it again. It's kind of like that. Not exactly, but kind of like that. The positive emotional attractor doesn't just help you survive, it helps you thrive. So you're not just living, but living happily or more happily. So Boyatzis' studies have determined that the positive emotional attractor is more effective in like workplace settings and that sort of thing than the negative one at helping people change their behavior. And I think that that's probably, for me at least, the reason that, Buddhism did things for me emotionally in terms of changing what I do and changing the way I see life more than my upbringing did. Because it's more, look, it is the way we view the precepts as opposed to the way the commandments are viewed. Precepts are training rules. If I do these, I'm going to get the thing that I signed up for. I signed up for Buddhism to get enlightenment. If I do these things, then maybe I'll get that, or at least it'll move me closer. So the Buddha, they know this partly because they can see what parts of the brain light up in response to different stimulus. So the Buddha didn't have access to the equipment. He didn't have an fMRI machine. They didn't exist till fairly recently in the whole scheme of human history. But he did have access to his own mind. And he spent 6 years examining his own mind in great detail in meditation and other practices, and observing how his mind responded in different circumstances, mental circumstances. And he discovered something that neuroscience and psychology have since rediscovered, which is the importance of mindfulness to emotional well-being. So in this particular sense, mindfulness is a big old subject, but for the moment, this thing about mindfulness in terms of deliberately paying attention. So you're not just paying attention, but you're also paying attention to your attention, right? What am I doing with my mind right now? And that's part of what meditation is. But also, neuroscientists have identified what they call the default mode network, which is a network of brain regions that are active when we're not doing anything in particular, when we're not being particularly mindful. But then when we do something specific, like a goal-oriented activity, then the task positive network is activated. So when we're not doing anything specific, just kind of jiggling along, our thoughts tend to be fairly self-absorbed and reactive. So Robert Wright, the evolutionary scientist I mentioned, points out that when the mind wanders, it tends to wander toward threats, toward negative things. It tends to be kind of focused on self-preservation. So that was probably a really important thing when we had to worry that something was going to jump out behind a bush and try to eat us, right? But not so helpful in the modern world. When we begin to deliberately pay attention, however, we activate this different network. And so now we've turned thinking into something we're doing, into an action. And so while we tend to be otherwise self-absorbed and focused on the negative, this act of deliberate awareness will kind of shift our outlook into a more emotionally positive, more socially congenial, typically, direction. So because we're not so self-focused, we're focused on what we're doing, or then we can also be focused on the group, the benefit of the group. So Wright was a really interesting guy. I need to read that book. Like I said, I took the course that he was teaching as part of the research to kind of test out this material. I want to read the book. But he brought modern psychology to bear on a key teaching that often leaves newcomers to Buddhism really head scratching. And it's the idea of non-self. So in the discourse on the not self characteristic, the Buddha makes the statement that there is no self that is constant and enduring and that is truly mine. So this causes a lot of confusion. It's not that there's no self. Of course there's a self. There's no self as such, and there's no self that's really under my control. So in a conventional sense, we have a feeling of continuity, the ability to recognize the person we see in our reflection from one day to the next. And so relative to sensory experience, my sensory experience, sensory experience, there is a self here. But in an absolute sense, what I really have is an ongoing set of processes that include physical form, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings, sensations, perceptions, cognitions, and awareness, consciousness. And all those things are constantly changing. And as Wright and the Buddha both pointed out, none of those phenomena are really under my control. I can't just decide that I'm going to stay conscious for, 40 days straight. It just ain't going to happen. There's a lot of things that I can't decide. This form and mind will do. So in the discourse on not self, the Buddha asked his monks, if form was self, if this form was mine, then wouldn't it be possible to say, may this form be thus? And it would be as I ordered it. And he asked the same question about feelings, cognitions, and so on. And the monks, of course, said, no, I can't do that. So, if this self was truly mine, I'd make it younger and better looking, right? And you probably would do the same thing with yourself. But what we've got is what we sort of arrived in, what we live in. And it's a constantly changing thing. So, so this idea of self, of not self, kind of goes beyond that also. It turns out that when we look at the science relative to the brain and the mind, we find some more support for the idea that we have no self that is in charge of what we think of as us. In fact, there's a theory that comes from evolutionary psychology called the modular theory of the mind, which says, in essence, that what we think of as a mind of our mind is genetically influenced, domain-specific modules, each of them dedicated to solving a specific evolutionary problem that arose during the period when natural selection was shaping the human brain. And so what I think of as my mind is also not really mine. So this is kind of controversial stuff still, but research supports the idea that the mind, our thoughts, emotions, behaviors, are not under the control of this sort of single commanding self that we think we have. Each module sort of has a mind of its own. So think about this. You're driving down the road. I've used this example in talks before. You drive down the road and somebody cuts you off and you swerve and come to a stop and save your life, completely bypassing the conscious, cognitive process. It's as if it happened automatically without you having to think about it at all, because you didn't. It goes straight to a part of your brain that can react to things in a way that in some cases may not even necessarily align with your values. You could end up punching somebody in the nose because you thought because the part of your brain that doesn't think, that sort of bypasses executive function, perceived a threat and did that. And so, it's not like a conscious thing. I hate that guy, I'm going to hit him in the nose. But part of your brain goes, I got to defend myself, and does this. So, so when we think of the idea that there's a me in charge, if we can let go of that idea, then we can let go of a significant cause of our stress. There's a lot of support for that idea in contemporary psychology. Albert Ellis, who is the father of modern psychology, pointed out that this idea of self is at best vague, and that we exist really only as an ongoing process. And yet, we engage in a whole lot of self-rating. Think about people saying, I have good self-esteem or I have bad self-esteem. So that means you're rating yourself. Again, you've got this whole set of ongoing processes that are constantly changing and over which you have relatively little control, and yet you're going to decide it's good or bad. It doesn't really make any logical sense. We all engage in it. But this realization that we don't have a self can help us ease up on that. And so from the standpoint of what's mentally healthy, it makes a lot of sense to be skeptical of the illusion of the self as such under our ownership, and that has some enduring essence of me-ness, me-ness, not meanness, me-ness. So there's another teaching in Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths, which begins with the recognition that there's suffering. So one Sunday, this was several years ago, I was at White Sands, and it was during a Q&A after the Dharma talk. And somebody asked, it might have been one of you, I don't remember who it was now, said, the Buddha was enlightened more than 2,500 years ago. So why is there still hunger? Why is there still war? Why is there still suffering? Because, the whole purpose of Buddhism was to eliminate suffering? And this is a good question. So Buddhism wasn't to eliminate environmental suffering. You can't do that, but to make it possible for people and beings to stop suffering. And so I think modern science reveals at least a part of the answer to that question too. Poverty and war and other forms of suffering result from the three poisons of greed, anger, and delusion. And it'll take a lot of lifetimes to transcend all of that stuff. So the first big truth of Buddhism is that all conditioned things, which includes everything in conditional reality, are ultimately stressful. Everything in conventional reality, are ultimately stressful. And the cause for the stress is basically those three poisons, which are variations on the theme of desire. So, of desire of the form that leads to suffering. Don't get confused. Not all desire leads to suffering. The desire that leads to suffering leads to suffering, greed, hatred, and ignorance. Anyway, there's a different Dharma talk. But Wright points out that we can derive from Darwinism and evolutionary psychology the proposition that natural selection built in the ephemerality of sensual pleasure, which helps to explain this teaching that what arises from desire for sensual gratification will not prove to be satisfying over the long term. So this is a little bit less obvious maybe, but this probably actually helps us to survive. In order to survive, it's actually helpful to experience disappointment, to feel disappointed when we don't get what we want, when things don't turn out the way we hope or expected them to. So imagine, it's thousands of years ago and you're out on the plains looking for food and you see what appears to be a fruit tree. So you go to that expecting to find food on it and it's bare. Well, if you don't feel disappointed, then what happens? You stand there staring at the tree, perfectly happy that you got there and the tree didn't have any fruit. In which case, you won't go off and look for another fruit tree. You just stand there and starve. So the disappointment is, oh, I didn't get what I want. I better do something different. We also become acclimated to things that are pleasurable. That also helps us to survive. If something felt really good, we'd likely keep doing it to the expense of everything else. And so we might just eat till we explode, or maybe starve to death doing something that was pleasurable because we forget to eat. And it reminded me as I was writing this and making these notes that years ago there was, neurologists were studying the brain and they had found the pleasure center in rats. I think it was rats. And they attached an electrode to a rat's pleasure center in the rat's brain so that when they pushed a certain lever in their cage, it would activate the pleasure center. And I think it was, well, anyway, I think they were researching drug addiction, but I don't remember for sure. So these rats would just push the lever on their pleasure center, keep their pleasure center stimulated till they died. So they'd have to take out the lever so that they do other things like eat, drink, and sleep, and other things that rats do, right? So because otherwise they just starve to death. So our brains have to be wired, had to evolve in a way that the things in reality that gave us pleasure would stop giving us pleasure at some point so that we go do other things. On the other hand, we're often attracted to things that aren't good for us at all over the long run. And so we may be more attracted to sugary foods than is good for us, or to sex, or to power and wealth and things like that. And we might react violently to things that aren't really threatening at all. So a lot of these things derive from mechanisms in the brain that helped us survive when calories were few and far between. And so we get more calories from the sweet things and that kind of stuff. And so it helped us live, when we were basically animals. But so to answer that question, why is there still suffering? Well, war, poverty, suffering continue because humans continue to behave the way natural selection uh, created us, right? We often behave as if part of the mind is determined to lead us down the wrong path because it's the part of the mind that helped us survive as individuals. But evolutionary psychology also points out that the tendency of non-conscious mental activities might lead to things like the personification of the temptation in the form of devils and demons and things like that. So you might say that the compassionate, caring self also arose because we live better in societies with cooperation. And so part of our brain is in conflict with the other part of our brain a lot of the time. And so we might see how the compassionate, caring, rational self might experience urges to harm others, or succumb to lust and inappropriately and things like that, as if it came from another entity, because I know better. And so why do I have this drive to do this thing that I know I shouldn't do? So, a married person might recognize countless reasons why it would be really bad idea to run off with your best friend's spouse. And yet, despite all those reasons, the desire still arises and might even become insistent and intolerant and intolerable and stuff. And so it would be fairly easy to attribute that to, if you don't understand the brain, to some demonic force, some force of evil. So in Buddhism, you could say this is reflected in Gautama's encounter with Mara during the final days before his enlightenment. So convinced that he was near the end of his quest and determined to reach his goal, the Bodhisattva had to do battle with Mara, who had sent his daughters to appeal to his cravings and armies to exploit his aversions. So a lot of this scientific inquiry that has been directed at Buddhist practice has focused on meditation and its effects on the brain. But when the Buddha taught the path of practice to people who were not already ascetics, he usually started off with a couple of fairly simple practices: generosity and moral restraint. So moral restraint is reflected in the vows that we take when we go for refuge, refrain from killing and stealing and that sort of thing. And religious moral codes like this provide a kind of recipe for living that has evolved through human history because it is useful to the species. Might be inconvenient to the individual, but it's useful to the species. And so we have urges and drives that serve our desire to survive and procreate at the expense of our fellow humans and non-humans. And at the same time, we have social mechanisms that help us to thrive, to survive in the context of a safer, more congenial society. And so that's why the basic practice of Buddhism is giving. This is an active expression of goodwill, and an evolutionary psychologist might say that the brain has evolved to support the idea that compassion and goodwill are associated with living a good life, with well-being. And so when we're giving and when we're not harming others, we tend to feel better and happier as a result of that. And so the Buddha probably realized something like this when he said, if beings knew as I know the benefits of giving and sharing, then that no one would ever eat without having first given, and nor would the stain of miserliness overcome their minds. So the question kind of comes up, what happens when science and religion start to agree and might even advance one another's aims? And we're kind of exploring this a little bit in that Monday night thing, because a lot of what we're doing is where contemporary psychology is sort of helping support Buddhist practice. This could be great news Would a partnership between science and religion help everyone be healthier and happier? Or would we lose the mystery of religion and thus lose some of the poetry from our lives? So one day I was having dinner. Venerable Kai Tien was still at White Sands at the time, and there was another Vietnamese Zen master, I don't remember which one, who was there for a retreat or something. And we were talking about the future of Buddhism in the West because they had noticed that fewer and fewer people are willing to ordain and be monks and stuff. So what does this mean? What does this bode to the future of Buddhism? And the other monk said he thought Buddhism would survive and maybe even thrive, but that it won't be a religion. He thought it'd be more like a lifestyle, an activity people do, kind of a secularized, watered down version of itself. So, as an American Dharma teacher, I've seen that trend towards secularization happening in society. And I wonder about things like the ethics of teaching meditation as a secular practice or MBEI programs, to help make better workers and that kind of thing. So I think there's still a lot of questions that will arise as religion moves through this next millennium. And I think there's a lot of potential good, possibly some not so good things. So I think it's possible that at some point, some generations in the future, as our society continues to evolve, science gets better at looking at the human mind, we may mean something very different when we use the word religion. And maybe a faith will evolve that really helps us transcend all the mind's urges to survive in favor of those that help humanity thrive. But I think we'll always have religion. Just as the human mind responds to art, which speaks to our hearts in a way that transcends the rational intellect. So I think the human heart responds to faith too, which gives us a deeper experience of community and compassion and love and joy without us having to think about it all the time. All right. So anyway, thank you very much for your time and attention. I see I've gone over a little bit this evening, but I hope that this was useful to you. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night or some other point in the future.